and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges-Watson. Coming up today, world leaders urge Hamas to release the Israeli hostages still being held on this, the second anniversary of the Palestinian militant group's attack, which triggered the war in Gaza. Coming up, we'll have the latest on the diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. We'll also have the latest on the humanitarian situation on the ground there in Gaza. Hello and welcome. Today, the 7th of October, marks 2 years since Hamas attacks on Israel, which triggered the start of the war in Gaza. Well, more than 67,000 people have lost their lives in the war-torn strip, many of them women and children. Well, despite day 2 of talks in Egypt aimed at bringing the conflict to an end, Israel continues its deadly strikes on Gaza, resulting in further civilian casualties. Well, in Israel, families are still waiting for the return of their loved ones. 48 hostages, of whom 20 are believed still to be alive, are still being held by Hamas. But in the context of the renewed diplomatic efforts and President Trump's 20-point plan, could we be close to reaching an end to this deadly war? Well, let's get the latest on the situation on the ground in Gaza. We can speak to UNICEF Spokesperson James Elder, who joins us now from Khan Yunis. Thank you very much indeed, James, for speaking to us. We last spoke in June, and I'm just wondering what's changed there in Gaza since you were last there. How's the situation evolved?
Well, Tom, it always gets worse, unfortunately. It's a cumulative effect because you've got people who have been pushed to their knees. They've seen their homes destroyed. They've had denials of food, water, medicine. We've got a famine in the north. And amid all of that, as all your viewers know, the indiscriminate attacks don't finish. So again, mass displacement of people. I think it's very important. Displacement, there's something about that word. It sounds abstract. It sounds neutral. It's not. It's violent. It's repetitious. And it's ongoing for many, many people. So even since the weekend and all the statements, we've had, 15 or more children killed, heavy airstrikes over those few days in the north, heavy here in the south. So people are hanging on, Tom, but it really is only hanging on. There is a collision here amid Palestinians, a collision of great trauma, great loss, and then deprivation of all those basics that people need. So, they're holding on, but honestly, as a woman said to me today, she doesn't know for how much longer.
Yeah, one of the questions being asked is why hasn't Israel stopped its strikes on Gaza in accordance with that deal? And I just wanted to hear from you, what's the level of aerial activity above Gaza right now? Are strikes being carried out near where you are?
Today, yes, absolutely. Today was particularly bad. Constantly hearing the sound, I guess, of F-16s and airstrikes. Drones always, but airstrikes heavily. Very, very kinetic morning. So, yeah, without a doubt. And in the north, where I'm always in touch with people, I was in the north last week. Intense bombardments, not seeing any concrete change, unfortunately, when it comes to that level of military activity. And remembering so many people in the north, tens of thousands of children, and this brutal contradictory logic that people can somehow leave. They have lost everything. They haven't got the financial means. Many of them have got wounds, or they've got an elderly parent or a child who's an amputee. They don't have the financial means to move south. They know that if they get south, they don't have a tent. They know how overcrowded it is. And they also, Tom, know that frequently these unilaterally declared so-called safe zones are also victims of airstrikes. So people don't have a choice about where to be here, because that thing that UNICEF has been saying now for 2 years, nowhere is safe in Gaza, is demonstrably true.
And just tell me about your trips to the hospitals there. What sorts of injuries are you seeing? And I'm particularly interested to hear about the children, because that's obviously the focus of your work.
Oh, look, Tom, I'm in hospitals all the time. They're war zones. I don't know. If I think just to a 30-minute period last week, literally 30 minutes at Al-Aqsa Hospital, beg your pardon, in the middle area in Deribala. I walked straight into a tent outside because, of course, the hospital is overflowing. It's way beyond capacity. There are 3 children in there who've all been shot by quadcopters. I go into the main hospital, it's children and the wounded on the floors, the scream of people because of that lack of painkillers, but the floors, hospital corridors are awash with the wounded. There's a boy who'd been shot earlier in the day at one of these GHF militarized sites. His mum was saying he'd been on the ground for 5 hours. Finally, they got him onto a stretcher, and when they did, another child took his place in the hospital corridor. A little 5-year-old girl, Sham, she came in, she'd just been pulled from the rubble. The look of fear, terror on her face, and of course all the ash and smoke, dust all over her. She was lucky. Doctors got to her quickly. She didn't have internal injuries. She didn't have any broken bones. But she also hadn't been told that her mum and her sister were killed in that strike. And then I went in, Tom, to what is basically a makeshift ICU. And there's a little girl in there, Aya, and I was looking at Aya because she's in intensive care, but she had these little hair bobs in. You could see the level of care that someone had spent on Aya on the morning before the airstrike. And as the doctor was speaking to me about her situation, her medical situation, Aya died. She just died. That's half an hour in a hospital, Tom, and that's by no means irregular.
Right, and I mean, as you paint the picture there of a desperate situation 2 years today since the violence really kicked off there in Gaza, and hard to imagine how people have the cash to buy any supplies. And even when we spoke a couple of months ago, you said that food, water, sanitation, all very, very challenging, presumably worse. And now winter's on the way. I mean, a deal cannot come soon enough for the people of Gaza, can it?
No, it really can't. Hey, everyone always asks if people hope. Palestinians are very savvy to international relations. They saw hope time and time again extinguish in 2024, but they've been denied, homes and healthcare and the ability to protect their children, the ability to feed their children. They've been denied dignity. They're holding on to hope. But yeah, as you say, on cash, I mean, there are things in the market, but the prices, I've had families explain that they go into a market to look at vegetables, to window shop for food. Now, I also did spend a lot of time today with families who get UNICEF cash assistance, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of people. It's a game changer. A particular woman, Rania, her baby was severely malnourished. She got the cash, she bought the foods, we got her to a nutrition center. When I met that little baby today, that's an energized little baby. So cash is a game changer for people here. Ever more so, because whatever does come in the markets, as you say, it's winter coming. People need that winter clothing. They left with so little. People have been displaced so many times. So winter means rain. They both mean cold. They mean even more need for people to have cash and to access whatever they can in the markets. And of course, for agencies like UNICEF to be able to bring in as many winter supplies as we possibly can.
Right, so as you're saying, cash would be one way, and obviously you give an idea there to people who might be watching, wondering how they can help. That would clearly be a useful thing for people to donate towards. Just lastly, I mean, 2 years of destruction today, 2 years of violence. I mean, what sort of a collective psychological toll has this taken on Gaza's 2.2 million people?
It's a great question. I mean, unprecedented, and that's the words that a child psychologist would use. And child psychologists are also very worried when this all does end. Please make this end. When this ends, that it'll somehow get worse for a time because people have a moment to breathe. They'll have a moment to go back and see the rubble and to realise, to reflect on having lost a mum or a loved one or a daughter. So we're in uncharted territory when it comes to trauma. UNICEF's never spoken before about every single child needing mental health support. So all the more reason why this needs to end, and it needs to end today, because it's very hard to treat those children for that trauma when it's ongoing, when they're still in a tent tonight, when they're still hearing the F-16s overhead. It's not a cliche when I talk about why Palestinians also have hope, because of their ability to bounce back. There's something in that ability over years and all the atrocities and all the crises Palestinians here have faced. There is something real, and that foundation is education. That's one of the highest literacy rates in the world. That's the teachers, the doctors, the nurses, the engineers, the computer scientists. There's a reason during the ceasefire, supermarkets were suddenly full and friends would tell me they were having cake and cappuccino. It's because they've got systems in place to bounce back with, and those systems are based on education. So there's a good, real reason to be hopeful there. But those systems, that education, that healthcare, those families, that agriculture, they're all under attack. So Palestinians don't know how much longer they can hold on.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us on what sound like very difficult circumstances. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder and Khan Yunis, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
We're joined now by Gregg Carlstrom, who is the Middle East correspondent for The Economist, who joins us from Riyadh. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I mean, The Economist has been pretty clear in its position. Earlier on in the year, The Economist called for a ceasefire and an end to the war in Gaza. We'll pick up on that in a moment, but just first of all, does it look to you like an end is now in sight?
I think we still don't know. I think we are closer than we've been at any point in the past 2 years to an end. But it's not clear yet if Israel and Hamas are resolving some of the substantive disagreements they have relating to this 20-point ceasefire plan that Donald Trump has put forth. There are a lot of things that were either left vague in the initial proposal or things where Israel and Hamas simply do not agree, from the question of Hamas relinquishing its weapons to the extent of Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. We've had 2 days now, or almost 2 days of negotiations, but there haven't really been signs of concrete progress on those sorts of issues.
Okay, we'll come back to the talks in Egypt in just a moment. I just want to ask you a bit more about the Economist's editorial line on this particular issue. I mean, it's normally quite a cautious publication. And I'm just wondering why The Economist did spell out its opinions on this particular conflict earlier on this year. What prompted that?
I think a number of things prompted it. One was the absolutely appalling humanitarian conditions in Gaza. I mean, we've been talking for months now about famine in Gaza City, about hunger in other parts of the territory. We had a period of months where Israel wasn't allowing any aid whatsoever to go into Gaza. And obviously that was part of why we thought there was an urgent need for a ceasefire to allow more humanitarian aid to go in. But then I think there's another part of it as well on the Israeli side. And when we write these leaders, these opinion pieces, sort of spelling out our position as a publication, we're often trying to pitch them to governments, to people who might read The Economist, who work in various governments. And one of the arguments we've tried to make to the Israeli government for many months now is that the war is not accomplishing anything for them. On a strategic level, they haven't done any more significant damage to Hamas in recent months. They haven't freed their hostages. They haven't come any closer to a sort of durable, peaceful end state in Gaza. And at the same time, they have done grievous standing to their international reputation. You look at the European countries lining up last month, for example, to recognize a Palestinian state. That is a direct result of Israel's conduct in Gaza over the past 2 years. So you put those two things together, what Israel is doing to Palestinians in Gaza and what Israel is doing arguably to itself on the world stage. And it wasn't a very difficult argument to call for a ceasefire.
Yeah, and as well as the reputational damage to Israel, I mean, you think about the 67,000 Palestinians or more who've been killed, a third of them believed to be under the age of 18. And, in terms of what Israel's achieved during these last 2 years, I mean, it's fair to say, isn't it, that one of the direct consequences of these last 2 years of hostilities is going to be an ever longer cycle of revenge and hatred, which in turn will make Israel a less secure country.
And I think both internally and externally. Internally, in the sense that, yes, there is an entire generation of people in Gaza now who have grown up, not just in 2 years of war, but in the decade plus of blockade that preceded the war. People who have lived essentially in conflict for their entire lives. And that is going to be obviously an issue for Israel going forward. You look simultaneously at what Israel is doing in the occupied West Bank right now with the expansion of settlements, with the extreme level of settler violence that we've seen since October 7th. All of this making it very, very hard to even think about some sort of a two-state solution or a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And then you pair that with not just public opinion shifting in Western countries, but public opinion, I think, around the world. I mean, there has been a real hardening of views towards Israel over the past 2 years, and that's going to have long-term consequences for their economy, for their diplomatic relations with other countries, and for what sort of a country they are.
Even today, it's being reported that Israeli tanks, boats and jets have been striking parts of the Gaza Strip. And the Qatari Foreign Ministry raised a legitimate question. They said, why hasn't Israel ceased operations in Gaza in accordance with President Trump's plan? I mean, it's a fair question, isn't it? And one wonders why Israel is disregarding this. And at the same time, President Trump says things look like they're going really well. I mean, what do you make of all of this?
I think, like everything, it comes down to a question of how much pressure is the American president willing to exert on Israel. We saw through the entirety of Joe Biden's presidency that he would make demands of Israel, or he would complain about things that Israel was doing in Gaza, but he wasn't prepared to exert any real pressure. He wasn't prepared to threaten consequences on Israel for doing those things. And so it kept doing them. Trump, we have seen him, particularly over the past few weeks, be more willing to restrain Israel's conduct. But there needs to be sustained focus from the White House on that. It's not just a matter of Trump saying in a single Truth Social post that he wants Israel to stop bombing in Gaza. If he really wants it to stop doing that, he needs to be on the phone with the Israeli prime minister. He needs to be applying real diplomatic pressure. And I think that clearly is not happening at the moment. I think Trump very often will say something on social media, will put it out there, and then we'll sort of move on to other things. And that sustained follow through hasn't exactly been a hallmark of this administration.
Right. And for there to be any chance or for preparations to be made for the release of the hostages, I mean, very hard to imagine that taking place unless there is a cessation of hostilities. I mean, that's got to happen in order for the next thing to happen, which is for the hostages to be freed.
And this has been one of the issues that Hamas has been raising, both in these talks with Israel this week and in negotiations with the Egyptians and the Qataris previously. The hostages are not all in one place. They are scattered in various locations around Gaza. Not all of them also are held by Hamas. Some of them are being held by Islamic Jihad or by other militant factions in Gaza. And so there is a need for a cessation of hostilities, to find them, to sort of bring them out and to hand them over to the Red Cross. That's what we saw back in January when the previous ceasefire took effect. There were periods in the run-up to that ceasefire beginning where Israel agreed to, for example, suspend overflights of Gaza so that there were no planes overhead for certain periods of time throughout the day to facilitate the release of the hostages.
So we talked a bit about the international pressure that Israel and in turn Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are feeling. But in terms of domestic pressure, one poll I saw, I think it was the Institute for National Security Studies, said that 72% of the Israeli public are, quote, dissatisfied with the government's handling of this war. What does that mean, do you think, for Prime Minister Netanyahu post-war?
And it's not just the one poll, right? This is many months of polls at this point, which all find basically the same thing, that 2/3, 3/4 of Israelis want the war to end, and they also want Netanyahu to step down as prime minister. They want early elections. The roadblock to that has always been that members of his coalition are not willing to defect. They're not willing to vote for a no-confidence motion in parliament that would force the dissolution of the Knesset and trigger an early election. Now, what's likely to happen here is if Netanyahu indeed agrees to a ceasefire, some of those far-right members of his coalition are going to leave. They don't want the war to end. They don't want their dreams of rebuilding Israeli settlements in Gaza to be dashed. And if those dreams are dashed, if there is a ceasefire, they're likely to bring down the government. And so what we're seeing Netanyahu do, I think, over the past few days is start to make make a pivot towards running an electoral campaign. He thinks one is coming. Perhaps as early as this spring, there might be an election in Israel if there is a ceasefire. And so he is trying to craft a message to the Israeli public that this ceasefire is going to represent a victory, that Israel has achieved everything it set out to do in Gaza, that the final hostages are coming home, and he's going to try to make the case for why he should be reelected. I think that's a very tall order, given, as you say, that 70+% of Israelis are unhappy with the performance of this government. But at the same time, it's not clear yet who is going to run against him, what the opposition is going to look like, and if there is going to be a sort of viable anti-Netanyahu coalition standing in the next election.
And do you subscribe to the theory that once the war ends, Netanyahu's legal woes will catch up with him and that'll spell the end of his political career?
I think you can never count him out. I think if we have learned one thing about him in his many, many decades in Israeli politics, it's that he is the consummate political survivor. I mean, what he has been trying to do, aside from the war over the past few years, is to make those legal troubles go away. It's tried to remove the attorney general, for example, and replace her with someone who might be more pliable, someone who might be inclined to throw the charges out and let Netanyahu go. He hasn't yet been successful in that sort of overhaul of the Israeli judicial system that he's been trying to achieve. So we'll see. I think some of it depends on the timing of an election. If there is a ceasefire in the coming days, if that does trigger the dissolution of the Knesset, then Netanyahu isn't going to be able to make much headway on those judicial changes that he's looking to do. If there isn't a ceasefire, then it could be another year until there's election. One isn't due until, I think, in October of next year. If that's the case, it would give Netanyahu more time to try and make these charges go away.
If President Trump's 20-point plan does deliver, and it does achieve the things that it set out to do, even points 19 and 20 in that 20-point plan that speculate on the future of or a pathway for a Palestinian state. I mean, this is going to go down, isn't it, as being perhaps the biggest US foreign policy triumph in decades, isn't it? Hard to think of anything as significant as this.
If phase two of this agreement, the longer term parts about Israeli withdrawal, about new governance in Gaza, and then, as you say, sort of building up to a renewed peace process of a two-state solution, if that phase two actually happens, it would be an enormous diplomatic achievement for the United States, for the Trump administration. You look at Gaza, it has been 2 decades where pretty much everyone in the world has treated it as an intractable problem since Hamas took power there in 2007. It was ensconced in power in Gaza. It was blockaded from both sides by Israel and Egypt, and everyone was just happy to ignore it, except when wars flared up, and they were usually quite brief. And otherwise, Gaza was a problem that no one wanted to try and solve. Now, if it can be, if there is a better future on offer for Gaza here, if there is a possibility of new governance, of Gaza being linked back up with the occupied West Bank and under the control of a single Palestinian authority, and then if that does lead to some sort of progress towards a two-state solution, it's a huge achievement. There's, I think, ample reason to be skeptical that some of those far-reaching parts of the plan are going to succeed, but certainly many, many people in the region hope that they will.
Well, clearly it's going to take time. Just lastly, Greg, I mean, could we be talking here quite legitimately about Nobel Peace Prize winning sorts of achievements?
Well, the timing of that is difficult, I suppose, because the Nobel Peace Prize is meant to be awarded in a few days, and we're not sure what's going to happen with these negotiations in the next few days. But listen, if they meet next year, if the Nobel Committee is meeting next year, and if there has been a change for the better in Gaza, if there is a process of reconstruction, if the ceasefire is holding, and if we are back on the path to perhaps some sort of effort to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if all of that happens, then I think they can certainly discuss a Nobel Prize.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Gregg Carlstrom, Middle East correspondent for The Economist. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
We're going to cross to Tel Aviv now and speak to Dr. Alon Liel, who is a former Director General of the Foreign Ministry of Israel, former Israeli ambassador to South Africa. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, sir. I mean, first of all, of course, today is the second anniversary of the 7th of October, the bloodiest single day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. I'd just like to ask what's going through your mind today.
It's a day of mourning for the Israelis, but also a day of summing up the last 2 years. I think, from my aspect as a former diplomat, we see a deterioration, a very serious deterioration in Israel's international standing. This week of the second year of the war, we saw huge demonstrations in Europe. 2 weeks ago, we saw 10 recognitions of Palestine. So I think this diplomatic tsunami is being felt here. And on top of it, we have now this American pressure on us and the Turkish-Qatari pressure on the Hamas that gives some hope that both sides were weakened and both sides can go now to this exchange of hostages and prisoners.
Okay, I mean, it's fair to say, isn't it, on both sides, that the vast majority of people want an end to this bloodshed, don't they?
Hard for me to speak about the Palestinians or the Gaza population, but I think in Israel, there is a majority that wants the hostages back in exchange for the prisoners. Among the prisoners, we have prisoners that are there for life, over 200 or 250 of them. But I still see the majority wanting to see this exchange being done. If you ask me about the further stages, if the majority wants to see peace between us and the Palestinians, or two states, or a Palestinian state, I'm not sure at all. But for the exchange that is ahead of us, hopefully in the next week, I think there is a lot of support in Israel.
Just going back to what you said at the beginning about Israel's international standing being damaged, I mean, how do you think history is going to look back on this 2-year chapter? And do you think that damage is permanent?
Good question. First of all, without the long term, I don't remember in other conflicts around the globe, including the struggle against apartheid, because I was then the Israeli ambassador there, this amount of people in the streets, huge demonstrations, huge, all over Europe, in almost every major city in Europe. And I think this change of civil society and public, so much involved, on top of what the governments are doing, is unprecedented. And I think it carries a lot of weight here with what is happening in Israel now. Regarding the long term, I definitely think that it will take us many years, hopefully not many decades, to overcome the damage to Israel, to its image, and to the Jewish people that mostly supported what we did in Gaza. And I think, especially if the war will go beyond the hopeful exchange of prisoners and hostages, if the war will go on for months or, God forbid, more, I think it will be defined internationally as a genocide and be very difficult for a small country like Israel and for the Jewish people to carry a genocide on their shoulders.
I mean, given the number of people who have been killed in Gaza these last 24 months, and on top of them, the people they've left behind, the people who've been maimed, the children who've been orphaned, the 2 million or so people in Gaza who've probably been psychologically damaged in one way or another by everything they've seen and endured these last 24 months. Do you think that when you look at it collectively, is going to make Israel less secure as a country than it would have done otherwise, given the pent-up hatred and given that sense of collective trauma that's happened just the other side of a border fence?
It all depends if we will go from now on toward peace and hopefully reach an agreement or not. If the war will go on and the Israeli military forces will stay in Gaza and in the West Bank, I think we are getting to a point that it will endanger the future of the state of Israel. If on the other hand, this momentum of the negotiations now with the American, Qatari, Turkish, Egyptian pressure will lead us into the negotiations room. And in the room, we will achieve a fair and decent and lasting agreement. I think it'll be easier for us in the future to improve the image, to pay compensations, and to maybe one day overcome the difficulties.
I mean, clearly President Trump has put a lot of energy into creating this 20-point plan, holding, numerous rounds of talks, not least with your Prime Minister last week in Washington. We heard President Trump saying Israel must immediately stop the bombing of Gaza. He said that on Friday, I believe. I mean, that hasn't happened, and I'm wondering why you think Israel is not accepting or is not obliging that request put forward by President Trump.
No, I think it always happened that the timetable that the president gave was not always implemented as he wanted, as he demanded, and even the issue of ceasefire. But I see this more as fine-tuning issues. Generally speaking, Israel can say not or cannot say not to the United States at this stage. The United States is maybe with Germany the only friend we still have on the globe. And if the Americans will be serious into pushing us into this deal of exchange of prisoners and hostages, we have to go along with it. And always we can give an excuse of dates and hours, but this is the direction. The same, by the way, about Hamas. I don't see the Hamas being able to oppose the pressure of its best friends on this globe, Qatar and Egypt. So, in fact, the deal is being done between the United States on one end and Qatar and Turkey, maybe Egypt on the other end. And this was done very cleverly because the mediator has to be balanced. And the United States cannot mediate between Israel and the Palestinians. It's too close to us. In the same way, Qatar and Turkey cannot mediate because they're too close to the Palestinians. So building such a group of mediators can lead to the deal. Still, I separate between this ceasefire and exchange of hostages to prisoners and peace. I don't think we have a government, we have a leadership in Israel that intends to go to peace. I don't think with this coalition we can even enter the negotiation room seriously. So I'm quite pessimistic about these hopes that the Trump pressure will lead us to ending the war and to a different future.
Are you expecting a full release of the hostages by Hamas, or do you think it's more likely Hamas will calculate that a partial release would be more prudent in their situation, given that not all deals have been honoured in the past, not all ceasefire deals have been adhered to? What are your predictions?
As it looks now, and as we speak, both of us, they are negotiating in Cairo. and the Americans are on their way to Cairo. So it looks as if both sides at the moment are aiming at an overall deal. I don't know if they can really implement all of it. And I see also a big obstacle in the question of the release of Marwan Barghouti. The Palestinians want him. And for us, he is a symbol, a big symbol of Palestinian leadership. And it'll be very difficult for Israel, for this government to release him. And I think we have to put this question of Barghouti under a kind of a microscope and see if it happens or not. Because if it happens, it's a very good sign that Israel is ready to go a further step into negotiations. And if he will not be released, it means that we want to keep him in jail, because we really don't want to start negotiations.
Okay, I mean, just in terms of where we head to from here, I mean, does it look to you like we're at a stage where we have perhaps more momentum than we've had at any stage during these last 24 months? Is that how it looks to you?
No, we had exchanges in the past.
But this kind of momentum?
Yes, we had exchanges, we had momentums. I think we had 255 hostages and only 48 left. So during the last 2 years, we had exchanges, but this should be the final one. This should be the one that should lead to a ceasefire, to ending the war, and to peace. This we never had. All previous deals were defined as partial, as temporary, and this one is being defined as the deal that should end the war and start a new era. So from this point, it's a very different momentum.
Dr. Alon Liel, former Director General of the Foreign Ministry of Israel, former Israeli Ambassador to South Africa. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Fred Fleitz, the former US National Security Council Chief of Staff under President Trump during his first term. Mr. Fleitz joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again. I mean, first of all, obviously today is the 7th of October. It's the second anniversary of the bloodiest single day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. What's going through your mind today?
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for describing this horrible day that way, because this was a massacre, and it kicked off this devastating war that has to end. We can't shy away from what happened on October 7, 2023. I see many media outlets really don't want to talk about what happened, and they'd rather focus on one side of the conflict. But on today, we have to talk about what Hamas did, and that's what I've been doing in other media interviews.
Sure. I mean, we're very conscious of examining both sides of the story, and indeed President Trump's efforts to draw a line under the conflict that those tragic events triggered. I mean, does it feel to you like President Trump's 20-point plan is on track to deliver?
Well, it's a remarkable plan. We've seen other plans fail. This plan has the support of key Arab states, the Palestinian Authority, and Israel. Significant compromises were necessary. There is a plan that the Palestinian Authority will eventually administer Gaza after reforms and de-radicalization, and even a pathway to a Palestinian state after significant reforms, which I didn't think Israel would ever agree to. But these were crucial reforms to making sure that America's allies in the Gulf were able to sign on to this. This is what they needed. Now we have President Trump's promise to push this forward and make both sides abide by the deal. I think we've gotten so far because we have in Donald Trump a president who both the Arabs and the Israelis can trust. They realize that he's not going to be fronting for either group. He's going to push for a deal that's fair, and he's going to push Israel to stick to the terms of an agreement.
Right. I mean, obviously, President Trump has a different approach on many issues to many of his predecessors. And indeed, this issue eluded many of his predecessors. So there's every reason to hope that a different approach will yield different results, i.e., a favorable outcome for all parties. It is described, though, as being light on detail. But I don't think that's necessarily a problem, is it? When you look through those 20 points, it's quite a clear framework. I mean, do you think that could be its key feature, if you like, the fact that it is really quite clear and quite simple?
I think it's very clear. Hamas has to disarm. Its weapons have to be destroyed. If Hamas fighters don't want to renounce violence and live in peace with Israel, they'll be allowed to leave the country. Hamas can't play a role in governing Gaza, and I think that's the view throughout the world. This is a terrorist organization that committed a horrific massacre, and they're not going to be part of society in Gaza. And I think that's going to be a red line for the Israelis. But, you know, one aspect of this plan that's unique is that there is a process in the plan to move forward without Hamas. If it won't agree to this, areas of Gaza that have been cleared of Hamas fighters will be turned over to the international force, and a process will proceed to rebuild Gaza and to establish peace with or without Hamas. I hope it doesn't come down to that, but that puts real pressure on Hamas to come to an agreement.
Mr. Fleitz, obviously those talks are taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and we're on day 2 of the talks. And while the talks are happening, Israel is continuing to strike Gaza from the air, from the land, and from the sea. But in your opinion, do you think there needs to be a cessation of hostilities for those talks to bear fruit?
Well, President Trump has asked Israel to stop attacking Gaza. I think the attacks we're seeing from Israel are in response to attacks by Hamas. I know there was a rocket fired on Israel from Gaza today. I think there should be a ceasefire by both sides immediately as these talks proceed.
Yeah, indeed. President Trump said Israel must immediately stop the bombing of Gaza so we can get the hostages out safely and quickly. I mean, very difficult to imagine, isn't it, how you would even begin to go about locating and transferring the hostages under the reign of aerial strikes. And, that's something that clearly needs to happen, doesn't it, for the hostages to be released?
Hamas has to end the war and agree to release the hostages. That's what will bring about peace and stability. And it has been given an opportunity to do that. And our allies, especially Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE, they're just telling Hamas, this is it. This is the final deal. You have to end this war. We're not standing with you resisting a plan that we have endorsed.
I mean, that plan, point number 19, is quite clear when it comes to, putting in place a pathway for the construction of a Palestinian state. And yet the very next day, after discussing it with President Trump last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu dismissed that and said it's simply never going to happen. I mean, does it look to you like he's cherry-picking or worse still, reneging on his word?
Israel has agreed to a deal that says there will be a pathway to a Palestinian state. If Netanyahu thinks that's unlikely, that doesn't mean the agreement of his country to this deal means that they're not including that part of the agreement. This is part of the agreement, but there's some pretty strict conditions. The Palestinians have to be de-radicalized. They have to stop teaching their children to hate and to kill Jews, to destroy the state of Israel. If Israel feels secure, it will agree to a two-state solution. It did so in the past, and this is a plan the Trump administration has said has to include this provision, because we don't have this provision, we don't have the support from other states in the Middle East.
But one of the things that I just wonder if it worries you, I mean, when it comes to Israel's longer-term security, I mean, when you think about what's happened in Gaza in the last 2 years, 67,000 people approximately, although we don't have an exact number, have been killed. A third of them, we're told, under the age of 18. I mean, hasn't what's happened these last 2 years and the likely cycle of revenge and continuing cycle of hatred actually made Israel less secure by default?
I think Israel is actually much more secure. It destroyed Hezbollah in Lebanon. It significantly reduced the threat from Iran. It has devastated Hamas as a fighting force. I mean, a consequence of this conflict is that Israel has taken on its adversaries, which threaten other states in the Middle East, and has significantly weakened them. So I think this problem with Hamas is that they are a movement. Crushing them is probably impossible over the long term, but maybe with this agreement they can be controlled, and people who don't want to live in peace will leave the region.
I want to ask your opinion on the decision that was made by a number of Western powers to recognize a Palestinian state prior to those conversations in the Oval Office last week between the US president and the Israeli prime minister. What do you think that changed?
Well, I didn't support that decision. Why the British and the French would recognize a Palestinian state without asking for any concessions from Hamas while Hamas is at war with Israel, I think that was a mistake. Instead of doing that, the Trump administration pushed for an agreement that required compromises by both sides and left the prospect of a Palestinian state as a goal in the future if the Palestinians decide to de-radicalize. I wish that's the way these European states had done, because I think they were rewarding terrorism by giving this concession to Hamas without asking for anything in return.
And so for those who say that this added some momentum to the process, this gave some impetus, further impetus to progress to be made diplomatically, you'd say you'd disregard that.
I think that's ridiculous. I think it actually made it harder to negotiate with Hamas.
Okay, fair enough. Obviously, the fighting continues. Hostages have yet to be released. Aid is yet to come into Gaza in the quantities that's required. And post-war planning needs to take place. I mean, in the process, for all of these things to happen, I mean, what do you anticipate as being the biggest hurdles?
I'm just hopeful that we're at a point when Hamas will agree to release the hostages and put itself on a pathway to peace. My understanding is that there is a division between the political wing of Hamas and the military wing, the fighters on the ground who want to keep fighting. I think the political leaders would like to accept this deal, and somehow we have to get the message through to the fighters on the ground in Gaza that it's time to lay down your arms and agree to peace. That's probably the biggest challenge, and I don't think the U.S. can do this alone. We really need help from our Gulf state allies to find a way to reach these fighters, these leaders in Gaza, to tell them that the time has come for peace, the time has come to release the hostages.
And of all the diplomatic efforts that have been made these last 24 months, I mean, would your assessment be that this is the most promising effort so far towards ending the war?
I think it is a monumental agreement because it has such widespread support. As I said earlier, it was complicated. It required some pretty significant concessions from Israel. It required Israel to apologize to Qatar for the bombing of Qatar. This was really unexpected, but it was because of Trump's belief that we have to work on this together. This can't be a plan that the U.S. forces on the region, forces Hamas to accept, forces Arab states to accept. We have to come forward together.
Could this perhaps be, if it obviously works, could this go down in history as being, the 20-point plan by President Trump, the greatest foreign policy triumph the U.S. has achieved in recent decades?
I think it will be a very significant foreign policy triumph. It obviously qualifies Trump for the Nobel Prize, but that's not why he's doing that. More important, if Trump can pull this off, I think it may provide a model for resolving other conflicts, particularly the war in Ukraine. If Trump can say to Putin and Zelensky, I am an honest broker you can deal with, you know that from what happened in Gaza, maybe he can get Zelensky and Putin to deal too.
Would your prediction be the Nobel Prize will be the 2025 prize or the 2026 Peace Prize?
Listen, I don't trust the Nobel Peace Prize Committee to be fair, so I'm not going to say Trump getting the award is likely, but I simply will say he more than deserves it.
Okay, you say he more than deserves it. I mean, what happens if these negotiations fail? Where does that leave us?
Well, that's actually contemplated in the agreement that if Hamas refuses to deal, Israel will have America's support to finish off Hamas and to take the rest of Gaza City. Portions of Gaza that have been cleared of Hamas fighters we turn over to the international force. This will proceed in stages, and we will begin a peace process and the rebuilding of Gaza without Hamas. It may be difficult, but frankly, this war has to end. Hamas will not have a terrorist veto any longer, but it does have an opportunity to make peace on very good terms, and I hope Hamas's leaders take advantage of this opportunity.
Okay, and just lastly, Mr. Fleitz, I mean, President Trump clearly is impatient as everyone else in the world to see this conflict come to an end. He's urging negotiators to, quote, move fast. I mean, are they moving as fast as they could? And what sort of a time frame do you think we're looking at here?
Well, the president gave Hamas 6 p.m. Eastern time to come to an agreement. Now, here we are on Tuesday. Hamas has not come to an agreement yet. Trump still has patience. He is still giving diplomacy a chance. But if it appears that Hamas is actually not going to deal, it's going to make unreasonable demands, it drags its feet, I think Trump's patience will run out.
All right. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Fred Fleitz, former U.S. National Security Council Chief of Staff under President Trump. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Good to be here.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.